First of all, if done right, the job creation potential in the transition to net zero is significant. So, for instance, the International Energy Agency last year published a report called its Sustainable Energy Action Plan, where it recommended that governments should focus their COVID-19 recovery strategies on low carbon investments. And it made the point in that report that some 9 million jobs could be created globally in areas as varied as renewable energy, electric charging infrastructure, energy efficiency, CCS, hydrogen, and so on. Now, of course, if we're going to create all these jobs, in order for this to actually materialize on the ground, we need people who are properly trained in order to be able to do those jobs. In a national context, in the UK, National Grid estimates that some 400,000 people will need to be recruited between now and 2050 for the energy sector to get to net zero. Again, there's a huge skills provision aspect to this. Now, the second reason I think low carbon skills strategies are so important is the fact that what's quite unique about the transition we're embarking on is that a lot of regions in the UK and different parts of Europe, for example, that have been in many ways left behind over the last 30 to 40 years, have seen lower degrees of economic activities, have seen a decline in industrial output, actually could stand to benefit from the net zero transition. So if you look at heavy industry, for example, we're seeing quite a lot of old industrial heartlands now being converted to act as low carbon industrial hubs. So in Hungary, for example, one of the dirtiest power plants that used to exist in Hungary, the lignite-fired Matra power plant, has now become a renewable energy cluster. You might be familiar with the European Commission's Climate Kick initiative. Now, Climate Kick is all about reviving industrial heartlands and helping them to move towards net zero emissions. So the focus at the moment of that initiative is to work with industrial clusters in Poland, in Silesia, in Germany, in North Rhine-Westphalia, to try and drive low carbon investments to those regions. You look at the UK and in particular the net zero strategy that came out 2 weeks ago, and we're looking at how we can decarbonize industries such as steel, cement, glass in areas as varied as South Wales, Teesside, Merseyside, Southampton, and so on. So there's a real opportunity to rebalance regional inequalities, but that requires a very careful approach to skill provisions in these different regions to make sure that the workforces in those areas are able to take on the jobs that will be created in those areas. And having a careful approach and a regional approach to skills provision is also critical to attracting investment in the first place. And finally, an issue that really struck us on the Green Jobs Task Force, and Jana Alstead here was on that task force with me, was the fact that when you move to net zero emissions, you can't escape the fact that the nature of some jobs will change over that transition. And a statistic that really made us all think quite hard came from the London School of Economics, who had done sort of research across different parts of the UK and concluded that in the UK, over the next 30 years, around 10% of UK jobs, so that's more than 3 million workers, will see their skills actually grow in demand, but an equal number will see the skills they currently have decrease in demand. So the nature of many jobs, such as, for example, in the steel industry, where the production process will change, we'll see the nature of their jobs change. So we need to really think about this very hard now to consider how we best support workers in those industries to adapt to the change in skills that will be required to continue operating in those industries. So I'll now move to my sort of second issue, which is what kind of skills are we looking at as we move to a net zero emissions economy? And I would say there's three sort of bucket of skills that we need to really pay attention to. The first one is around awareness of climate change, and that's something that education institutions and the school curriculum in general doesn't really pay all that much attention to at the moment. And I'm myself a governor at our local primary school, and there's hardly any focus on environmental sustainability or climate change teaching. But if we want the students of tomorrow to really be successful, they need to understand at the outset that they will be operating in a world that is carbon constrained, that is resource constrained, and need to make their business ideas work within the context. The second area is really around STEM skills. So what we call sort of STEM skills for science, technology, engineering, and maths. Those will be in high demand as we move to a low carbon economy. But again, many developed economies are currently seeing a shortfall in the amount of graduates and actually school students who take up those subjects. And we also have a gender and ethnic inequality subject when it comes to taking up STEM skills. So that will be something that will need to be looked at very carefully. And finally, soft skills. And something that came up a lot in our work on the Green Jobs Task Force was the importance of having good project management skills, good communication skills as we move to net zero emissions. Now, in most industries, the only way you'll be able to get to net zero is by collaborating not only with other businesses, but with other sectors. So just to give you an example, one of our cement manufacturer members, Cemex, have managed to cut quite significantly the carbon intensity of their cement production in Rugby by actually using waste collected by one of our other members, waste management company Suez, who have essentially turned household and business waste into low carbon fuel, which is now allowing Cemex to replace fossil fuels with waste-based fuels to manufacture cement that reduces the amount of waste going to landfill, it reduces your emissions in the process as well. But that requires really good project management, communication, and sort of collaboration skills. So that's something that we need to sort of foster in tomorrow's workforce as well. Now, finally, I thought I'd finish on what I feel are the most important pillars of a low carbon skills strategy. And I think there are three key pillars. And we, in making our recommendations to the UK government a couple of months ago as a Green Jobs Task Force, we focused on three main things. The first one is to do with the curriculum. We need to see, now different countries are positioned differently on that. Some countries do quite well in incorporating climate change in their curriculums. Other countries like the UK have got quite a long way to go. But there's a real piece to be done here around mainstreaming climate change and environmental sustainability teaching in the curriculum. Now, one of our members, the National Union of Students, actually did a report last year that found that 75% of teachers in the UK do not feel comfortable teaching their students about climate change because they've just not been trained to do so. So it's not just about mainstreaming climate change in the curriculum, it's about ensuring that teachers have access to the training they need in order to be able to do this properly. And of course, we need to look at the issue of STEM skills. And something we've recommended in our recent work is around developing skills action plans, both within schools, but also further and higher education institutions, to make sure that we can encourage more students to pick up those subjects, but also really tackle the lack of gender and ethnic diversity that we're currently seeing in those topics. And that's something we need to look at very carefully. The second plank of a good low carbon skills strategy has to do with reskilling. Really not just looking at the workforce of tomorrow, but looking at the workforce of today that will directly be impacted in the near future by the changing nature of their jobs. Now, I think many actors have a responsibility here. Businesses have a responsibility to carry out skill audits, to understand how the skills they need will change over the next 10 to 15 years and how they can prepare their workforce for it. I think education institutions have an important responsibility, if anything, in making available more short-term modular courses that people who are currently in work can realistically take on. So if you currently have a job, you've got 3 kids, you've got families to look after, you're not going to take 2 years off to retrain into something else and then start a new job. You're going to need to do your retraining, do your reskilling whilst carrying on the current job. So we need to have a range of courses that people can feasibly take. But there's of course a financial aspect to this, and that's where governments have a very important role. So one thing we recommended, for example, in the Green Jobs Task Force was for the National Skills Fund to provide financial support for employees to take some time off, to take up some of those training courses, or to provide support to employers. If employers let their employees free of charge take time off to take courses to support with reskilling and retraining, they need to be supported in that process as well. So we really need a well-rounded approach. Now, the final plank of a good low carbon skills strategy is, in our view, just remembering that skills do not sit in a silo. Ultimately, if you want businesses to invest in the skills of their workforce, and if you want education institutions to make more courses available, new courses available to provide the workforce with the low carbon skills you will need, you need a supportive policy framework that encourages businesses in the first place to invest in producing low carbon goods and services, to invest in growing the supply chains, to invest in job creation, and to invest in skilling up their workforce. I think there's a lot we can learn from the renewable energy sector. The policy framework there across Europe has been by no means perfect, but on the whole, what we have seen is clear targets. We've had renewable targets for quite some time. We've had supportive policies on innovation. We've had supportive policies on market deployment, whether that's through contract for differences or other forms of subsidies. But all of that has basically stimulated a huge amount of investment in offshore wind projects, onshore wind, solar, with knock-on impacts on supply chain growth, knock-on impacts on skills provision, And you'll now see a raft of colleges and universities across Europe offering specialized courses on renewable energy engineering. But that's come from, we didn't start with skills management. We started first of all by having a clear policy framework that drove investment in renewable energy. And we now need to repeat that across the heavy industrial sectors, across agriculture, across low carbon transport, and so on. So I'll stop now, but I hope that that's given you a good sort of bit of food for thought and help put this event in context. And now I'd like to hand over to the chair for today's event, Graham Sweeney, who's also the chair of the Zero Emissions Platform. So over to you, Graham.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. In the spirit of openness, I also need to tell you that in addition to showing the Zero Emissions Platform, Karen Turner is my boss. I am a visiting professor at the Centre for Energy Policy in Strathclyde. So privileged to have skills brought to our attention, often and now to talk about enabling a just transition for industry. On the panel, we shall have Karen Turner from the Centre for Energy Policy virtually, then Anne Bette Skreda from the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions. Cecile Farreau from the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group will also join virtually. Lee Beck from the Clean Air Task Force and Jane Cooper from Ørsted. And so I'm going to push us on as quickly as we can and give the floor to Karen Turner.
Good morning, all. Can you see me? Can you see the?
Yes, Karen, we can see you.
You can see me. Right, hold on, so just get back to the start. Okay, well, so I've been asked to just to give some framing remarks really around some of the work that we've been doing, particularly on carbon capture and storage. So I've done a few slides, which I thought was maybe easier than just looking at my face when we're virtual. I guess that my starting point here is really kind of where are we now? You know, it's in the UK, there's already been a commitment to net zero by 2050, that was made in 2019. And just a few weeks ago, we got the net zero strategy. So the UK, as the host of the COP, has come in with their hoping to have their net zero cards lined up. And this happened alongside when we got the net zero strategy. We also got the announcement of the first round of CCS cluster sequencing. So we got some action. And I think that's kind of reflecting, I think that there is a growing shift, and where there is not, there needs to be a focus in delivery of ambitious targets that are already committed or are going to be committed at this COP. But this has to be combined with a challenging but necessary dose of economic realism. And I think this is where agendas like the just transition and regional levelling up really need to move beyond talking space into tactical and strategic action. And of course, that brings in issues around skills and things like that we've just been discussing, but also around what jobs are going to be there and what might be displaced, etc. And I think this is crucial if decarbonisation pathways are actually going to become economically, socially and politically as well as technically feasible. And for this reason, we've at the Centre for Energy Policy, we set out a range of net zero principles really around understanding who pays, who really pays, how and when. And that's not just about identifying polluter pays or taxpayer pays, it's how things work through the system and impact on jobs and incomes and the prices that people pay. Generally, we need to find pathways that are going to allow us to sustain and grow our prosperity in an equitable way, and certainly a more equitable way than it has in the past, particularly coming out of the slump we've had with COVID. But generally, if we're asking people to take action now and pay now, we really want to try and find options and pathways that are going to deliver near-term economic returns so that the transition becomes really in a positive way. I think crucially, when we're talking about shifts between higher carbon activity to lower carbon activity, we need to make sure that we don't just offshore emissions. You know, the easiest way to reduce your emissions is to stop doing the dirty stuff. but that just supply chains overseas, so we lose jobs, affecting the just transition, but it also shifts emissions, so you're not addressing the problem of climate change. And from all of that, you know, we argue that net zero really is a societal and a public policy challenge more than it is a technological one. And I was, in the context of just transition, I was one of the Scottish Just Transition Commissioners. We reported to Scottish ministers back at the start of 2021, but we went out and talked to a range of people and a range of stakeholders across Scotland. And of course, you have people who are concerned about climate change itself and climate justice, but also mixed in with that, a lot of concern about communities, supply chains, because that's where the ripple effects come from shifting some of the major industries that we're talking about. So it's not just skills and job transfer, for example, in oil and gas, it's the ripple out to a wider set of communities. And the supply chains can be complex. They're not just technical supply chains, they feed throughout service sectors of the economy. So just transition, we're really talking about prosperity for people. And I think the road to net zero, you know, the Treasury has now completed its net zero review, but, you know, they highlighted even in the interim stage at the end of last year, start of this year, there's been significant progress, but there's so much more needs to be done. It's a collective effort, right up from individuals through businesses and government. We're going to need substantial investment in changing of where financial flows go, but crucially, there's going to be significant changes to how people live their lives and earn a living. And while the transformation will create jobs for the UK economy and new jobs emerge, we need to work out how the workforce is going to transition. So when we're doing our research at CEP, we focus on what are the net outcomes going to be for workers and the quality of jobs, household income distributions and the cost of living, and the trajectory of the UK's GDP and the nation's productivity, because we need healthy economies if we're going to deliver all of this. And so just a kind of a taster really, I guess, for what we'll be moving on to discuss, we did a study looking at what might be the impact of bringing in carbon capture and storage in the UK. And we're publishing a report. It's come out now, and there'll maybe be a link at the site for you to be able to access that. If not, just contact us. We found that the deployment of carbon capture and storage could be a source of green growth, where we called it a CO2 transport and storage industry, could exploit the capacity, workforce, skills and supply chains that are currently associated with UK oil and gas. So you do have the basis for a transition. However, what we found is that your positive GDP, productivity, employment, and also real wage outcomes could be eroded and new challenges emerge for the just transition if, in order to support the new T&S industry, we need to burden taxpayers and UK households or the emitting industries from themselves from the outset. And in particular, you know, while there's a lot of calls, you know, you've heard a lot of people talking this week about the big polluters should pay, we can get unanticipated negative outcomes from that, simply because if prices start to go up, you can make firms uncompetitive. They'll choose a different production location. They can move off and still do their business. But what's left behind is jobs and communities that are lost. So it's all about, can we decarbonise at source? Is one question. CCS lets us do that, but how do we actually fund it? That in turn also has implications. We found particular challenges around carbon capture, really because it speaks right to the return to capital that multinationals look at when choosing their location, basically because firms are having to use additional capital to produce the same output, and that further drives some of these offshoring risks, and particularly getting into the area of you might have tensions with levelling up agendas, because simply these the UK's industry clusters are located in some of the regions that really do need to level up. So there's a risk of them getting negatively impacted. And so from all of that, what's the positive? Well, it all comes back to what economists love about building efficiency and sources of competitive advantage. In the timeframes where we're supporting things like CCS, we need to make sure that we get good at using it, that it becomes part of the new economy, and that we grow our competitive advantage, especially if we're being early movers in the space. So that's my quick scene setting intro, Graham. So I shall hand back to your panel.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I'm going to move us on to Ed Skredder from the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Unions. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to echo the introductory points about reskilling and building jobs on the shoulders of existing jobs. We're not only talking about new jobs. We have people working in sectors that will transform completely, more or less, in the near future, and we need them to be sure that they will have a safe and decent job ahead of them. We are very happy that just transition is now on everybody's lips. It's a phrase that people are getting to know. We've been talking about just transition for workers for ages, and it's in the Paris Agreement, connecting just transition to the imperative of having decent work and quality jobs for the workforce. And that is an important link for us, because just transition can be used in many settings. But when we are here in the COP and we are talking about just transition, then we are connecting it to the Paris Agreement. So this is about jobs, it's about decent jobs, it's about the ILO's agenda for decent jobs, and it is about having the discussions both with us, but also for us and about us. So unless we are able to connect climate change measures and negotiations to working people, there won't be any good solutions ahead. So to be able to transit in a just way, that means that the workers and the social side of climate change needs to be on top of the agenda. There is a lot of discussions about what will we not do in the future and who should do it, what will be the new jobs. And that is very important, yes, and it's important to ensure that these new jobs, the new sectors, will indeed be quality jobs, decent work, but also that we don't forget that we have a lot of workers that will need to transit. In the petroleum sector, oil and gas sector in particular, we have talked a lot about CCS, carbon capture and storage, as the bridge for workers in that sector, because a lot of the skills that will be needed for the CCS in the future is already there. People are doing very similar jobs in the petroleum sector today. So that is a transition job. And that is why we are really pushing to have good investments, to have state participation in promoting CCS. So this is also a sector that we have looked at in particular to get together with research to figure out how many jobs are we talking about. And we have found that there are tens of thousands of jobs ahead in the CCS world. And this is why we really push for having investments that seem huge, but at the same time, if we don't invest in these technologies today, we are going to lose out, and we won't have this transition jobs. So once the politicians came over and he said, well, we're talking about us financing the equivalent of 15 local hospitals. How can you do that? And I'm saying, well, do you rather want to have tens of thousands of unemployed? What are your responses and your answers to that? And if you're not doing this in a socially just way, you will have people against you. And this is investment for future income. That is our clear answer to that respect. Yes, it's costly. Somebody has to go ahead and take the cost. There are so many emissions to cut with CCS, from waste incineration, from very huge industry emission points, and we should do it. It's the right thing to do. And then, of course, we want all the other sectors. We want the solar sector, and we want the hydrogen, and we want the batteries. And there are good jobs in those sectors in the future, at least we will do our part to organize the workers and see to that there will be good collective bargaining agreements and good skill programs, as the introductory speech also showed to that. We need to reskill people, and we need to make sure that they are transited into the new sector. So yeah, I see you are eager to go on.
So, very interesting. So for me, I hear the matter of equity, burden sharing, and then I think, can climate policy be progressive?
Oh yes, yes it can.
It can. It hasn't always been. So that's I think an interesting point we might come back to. So if I could now move us on to Cécile Farreau from the C40 Climate Leadership, Cities Climate Leadership Group. Cécile, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's good to be joining you from London. And a pleasure to be on this panel and a very important topic. First of all, just maybe a bit of scenery. Cities contribute to the climate crisis. They create 70% of energy-related greenhouse gas emission. And they also suffer and be directly impacted by the effect of climate change and climate risk. We can think of heat wave, wildfire, flash flood, water shortages. So their population and infrastructure are at direct risk now, which is why they know they need to be part of the solution, and they know that it is urgent. And this is why C40 is for, with all cities really collaborating together to deliver urgent action to confront this issue. But they have to be honest, they don't have a lot of direct power over industrial emission, and which is why Scope 3 emission and recognizing consumption-based emission is so important. We released in 2019 a report with Arup and the University of Leeds to start tackle this topic and help our cities understand how they contribute to emissions that are outside of their boundaries. And it is called the future of urban consumption in a 1.5 degree world. And we also, since 2019, have a clean construction program that gather over 35 global cities to really drive the transition toward regenerative, resource-efficient, and resilient construction systems. And for that, we're working closely with companies across the value chain to build the trust and share demand and supply signals, and really start the collaboration and the transformation that we need. But workers are the ones that will be delivering the change that we need. Without them at the table, without social dialogue, consultation, but also protection of their right and training for them to be part of this transition, they won't be able to deliver the change that we're asking them to. So it's really critical to work with union and social organization and partners to have them on the table and ensure that all of our work is inclusive, decent, and just. C40 has a number of initiatives on that. Our mayors are very much aware that it is an important topic. So we have a partnership, especially on clean construction, with Building and Woodworker International. But on this, we really want to focus on the need to ensure minimum income, to really have social protection for workers, skill development, retraining, workforce redeployment. We want new, good, and well-paid jobs for workers, but we want them to be able to access it. And really that comes to also protecting the most vulnerable groups: women, refugees, migrants, youth, those that are in the low income, the lowest income group. We need to ensure that they who are the most affected by climate change also are the first to benefit from this transition. We have released a call also in the summer on that, on just transition, and I would encourage you to look at it. there is a number of cities that are already taking action on this. And it is important to say that it's a movement that is starting. I don't want to spend too much time giving example from all cities over the world. It's starting on clean construction. It's more evolved on the energy system, with, for instance, the City of London, which announced a 10 million Green New Deal fund in November 2020 to boost green jobs, tackling the climate emergency and really addressing inequalities in the city. Barcelona is supporting thousands of people to cut their energy consumption and bills and really switch to renewable systems. New York City is really playing important role also in pushing for utility bill discounts. So there are a number of cities really taking action. So we had this Cities and Union Call to Action, which is called a Climate Decade for Good Quality Jobs, released in the summer. And we also have a research published this month that really shows that a green and just recovery that prioritize inclusive climate action in cities could create 50 million good sustainable jobs by the end of 2025. So we need to ensure that the workers, especially in heavy emitting industry, do benefit and access these jobs. Otherwise, it's really a missed opportunity. And that's really what we're working forward at C40.
Thank you very much. I think that the capacity of cities to set examples around procurement, for example, and in the execution of just employment practices is going to be substantial and important. Vivek from the Clean Air Task Force, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Graham. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to Justus and Bellona for having us. Clean Air Task Force is an environmental organization just like Bellona. We were founded in the United States and are now operating globally. And we actually believe that in order to enable a just transition, a fair transition to all communities, all countries, we need to commercialize all technologies that are available to enable communities, regions to transition with the technology pathway that's tailored to individual, social, local, and economical circumstances. So I think today I was asked to talk a little bit about how this discussion is evolving in the United States. And I think with President Biden's climate plan actually being called the American Jobs Plan being announced in Pennsylvania, a state where 11% of GDP comes from heavy manufacturing like cement, steel, chemicals, and 9.9% of the workforce, it really tells you that this administration in the United States is really thinking that climate policy is industrial policy. It is economic policy and it's infrastructure policy that must create good jobs and deliver place-based impacts. And the way to deliver those place-based impacts in the United States right now is really to invest in this next generation of clean energy technologies. As Nick earlier was saying, these skills don't sit in silos. We need to have skill sets and we need to deliver the transition, future-proofing those industries. So as we're looking at the American Jobs Plan, it's the largest ever proposed investment into the commercialization of carbon capture technologies. It's trying to bring the United States back on par with other countries that have a much better hydrogen strategy. And it's also aiming to deliver jobs, fair jobs. So a lot of the incentives that are currently being negotiated in Congress with regards to these technologies are tied to prevailing wage requirements and labor provisions and have enjoyed support from NGOs, labor, and industry. So a really interesting alliance that came about. And I think there's a really good political economic argument here that we've heard earlier is that you don't want to have enemies or you don't want to get the people against you. And the way to get the buy-in from our perspective at the Clean Air Task Force, from workers, from the public, from industry, is to commercialize these technologies, bring down the costs so we can actually deliver pathways for industries like cement or steel to decarbonize. And this way we can go for higher climate ambition, which of course in the US is on the table, but the more comprehensive climate policy framework is still lacking. So from our perspective, there's a political economic argument of change. And what I will say is the American Jobs Plan is being translated into policy in Congress. It's on the table with the infrastructure package, the reconciliation package, unprecedented incentives tied to labor provisions. And we're hoping that this package could pass anywhere between today, I was reading in the New York Times today, until potentially December 3rd, maybe through the end of the year. It's always a little bit uncertain in the US context. What does it mean, I think, or how does it compare to Europe, I think was also one of the questions that were suggested. And I think what's really interesting about Europe is that from a technology perspective, it's much more about comprehensive climate policy and climate ambition and less so about climate forward innovation, technology specific. So I think where these two areas can learn from each other to deliver just transition is Europe to be more focused on climate forward technology innovation, similar to what Norway is doing with carbon capture, and the US much more focused on comprehensive climate policy. That being said, of course, we've seen a new trade agreement this weekend announced by the US and Europe that other countries can join for steel and aluminum to a commitment to negotiate an agreement based on carbon intensity of these products. And this will, of course, deliver safeguard jobs, deliver more high quality jobs. So we're really looking forward to this new era of trade that was ushered in over the weekend.
Thank you. So I'm always attracted to the idea of a plan that can actually be executed, perhaps rather than hoping for the best in a framework. So I like the idea that it's an American's jobs plan. Jane Cooper from Orsted, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you for inviting me here today and Aldersgate group session. I was actually asked to speak about the role of business in the transition and in looking at green jobs. And I think our role actually is to create the jobs. And I think that's in carbon capture we've been speaking about, and in new technologies, but also offshore wind. So recreating the green jobs. And I think what we're also doing is supporting the energy intensive industries as they have to decarbonise, which is what we've also been speaking about this morning. So I think we can look at how we maintain those jobs and actually how we bring forward new technologies, which goes to your point. So we're looking at green hydrogen. How do we bring forward green hydrogen to help some of our partners? We're working with Mahumba, which is on the east coast in the UK. How can those technologies there, how can we learn about them, what we need? How can we help to decarbonise one of our partners, Phillips 66? How can they learn about the different skills that are needed? So working together to transition, create new jobs. Where have we been really successful? So one of the bits I'm really delighted to hear for me, I think today, just listening, this is one of the first times I've heard a lot of things coming together and a lot of the same threads being pulled together. So we work with local and national further education, universities, local colleges. And that's really important about that national agenda, but also about that local agenda, about what is needed in the regional areas and where people actually are working. We've got wind farms around the UK, on the east coast and on the west coast. We work with local colleges. We've got an apprentice programme that has been really successful. We are really improving and working really hard on our early entry. Diversity is a challenge. We have to be diverse. We have to be inclusive. We have there's a huge complicated problem we need to solve that we've all been talking about for the last few days. And we need to bring forward lots of different creative ideas about how we're going to do this. So we are looking at how we improve diversity and make the industry more inclusive. We're a new industry. There's no reason why we shouldn't be. This also goes to the early pipeline, STEM, going into colleges, as Nick was mentioning, going into schools. This is the opportunity. There are so many young people that want to be engaged in this world. This is the time to bring forward the people that don't often go into STEM subjects. This is the moment to encourage them to go through sciences, maths, technology, engineering, all those different areas. This is the moment. If we don't do it now, if we can't do it now, it's not going to happen in the future. This is now. My daughter will tell you about that as well. So We also work on a wider engagement. As a business, we work with Teach First, which is an organisation in the UK that works with schools to help the teachers bring forward learning and to help those teachers accelerate teachers that maybe are coming from business into the schools. We work with Teach First extensively. We work with USO, which is a charity that's been set up to help young people from difficult areas, some of the areas that we're looking to regenerate, help them come in to an area where they can come and sort of build their skills. So we work with USO over on the East Coast. And we're also working with another charity, Eureka, on the West Coast, which is also about Liverpool, about helping young people again to bring forward some of their skills. So those are the kind of things as a business that we're trying to do. I'm just going to, on the role of central and the local government, you asked about that. I think we were both on the Green Jobs Task Force. I think that I've been thinking quite a lot about what is the role of central and local government. I think it's about the convening power they've got. And I think it's setting a North Star. I think it's that they can set the direction. Because once government sets the direction, can be confident, the businesses can be confident, everyone's confident, this is the direction we're going. It allows us all to go and do what we're good at. And it allows us to all go and play with our strengths and collaborate across the piece underneath them. But if the government isn't being very clear in its direction, isn't setting out a plan, and I love a plan too, then it's really hard for other people to kind of figure out what's going on. So recently we're beginning to see the CCS work coming through into the hydrogen strategy in the UK, which will bring forward green hydrogen. That really helps us as a business to kind of commit to where we're going, where the money needs to be, where the investment needs to be. So that role of that national government, local government, we need to use the local government with the local regional local governments to actually bring forward some of the skills that we need to bring in local colleges, because every area is different. This is still speaking about cities. The different cities have got different needs, and I think it's really those local government that know how to put together. And I think we need to stop there.
Thank you very much. So, thematically, what we've heard is that a lot of threads are coming together here. Hardcore economics says that a just transition which is socially equitable is the right thing to do. We know that the matter of skills is going to be crucial. One of the problems for the United Kingdom is it hasn't had enough apprenticeships. Put another way, it produces too many people like me who don't actually know how to do anything. I think we have to have a focus on folk who can actually do stuff, that the quality of that has to be right, that the bottom-up stuff has to join with the plan, and all of that creates a huge opportunity for us. So thank you very much for all of that. Let me now open it up to questions from the audience. If there are any questions, please. Could I ask you if you would come forward and use the microphone for me? So the others can't hear it if you just speak up.
So just sit here in front.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, you don't have to stand, of course.
Right. Mike is from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and my question to either of the panelists, or maybe to several. I think I have several questions, but let's start with two maybe. One is, I feel in this debate now we have focused a lot on the industry sector, which in Europe and many other developed countries is obviously a small share of employment generator if we look at the whole economy. What are your views about decarbonizing the service sector? Do you think there are any systematic differences there? Maybe the second question is a more broader question about kind of killer arguments in public discourse. I feel that this job loss argument is sometimes used as, or misused sometimes maybe, as an argument against climate policy. And what are your views on how this can be turned around, how this can be changed?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If I can start with the last question, because what we often see is that we are expected to say that we're against anything because of the job losses. But we will not say that. So we kind of have that myth that workers are against mitigation and measures to take care of climate change, and that's not true. We know very well that we need to have a better and climate-friendly future, and we are people. We have children. We want the planet to be a healthy spot for everyone, and we see that we need these changes. And that's why just transition is the core, because that means that if we feel safe and that we are cooperating on building the plan on how to get into this new future, then you will have us alongside in any of these settings. And I must say that the lessons to be learned from the UK the Green Jobs work, and in other countries, the German Coal Commission, in Canada, they have done a lot of work on this. In Norway, we now have a Labour-led government that understands that the transition is an important issue, and that a tripartite social dialogue needs to take part in building this future. And we have high hopes that now it is possible to have that back on track in the agenda. And I think that will show that workers aren't against mitigation and measures. In fact, we are asking for more ambition, and we want ambition with a just transition. That is our core demand in that respect. Just one small issue, because yesterday the COP26 presidency launched its declaration on just transition internationally. We are very happy that so many governments have signed, and so many big governments. We pushed for them to sign. And this gives a very good basis for putting it on track nationally to see that countries deliver for the social setting, the social dialogue, and delivers also in their NDCs and in their reported obligations and commitments to achieve the 1.5 degrees. And that is what we want. So we are hopeful that this declaration is important and that it will lead to better cooperation in the future. So very glad for that.
So maybe we need to make it snappier. But the point is, the objection that climate policy loses jobs is a false framing. Progressive climate policy creates and changes jobs. And I think that's the core. So we don't need to be concerned. The economics now tell us that this can be done. And I think that's how we need to move the used to snappy, but I'm not so good at that. But I think that's the point. On service sectors, I'd say they're embedded in the big economy. And partly it's about what they do and who they do it with. And changing how they do that could be of major significance, particularly in the finance sector. And of course, a lot of cities deal with infrastructure that enables the services to be part of the transition. Which perhaps pick that up on a later occasion. So, with that, I'm afraid we are broadly speaking, well beyond time. That's my fault. I could thank the excellent panelists. I'm going to ask us to do that in the usual way. Thank you very much. The second panel. Thank you very much. Thanks. See you soon.
Around next Wednesday, so I'm going back next Friday, and I'm going to try and go to the Untitled transition hub and see what it looks like, so when you can get your person do it.
Yeah, it's very
right? And then at 12:30, in the green zone, they're doing a pilot performance, right? Which I've been helping them with the offshore wind side. And that's when you see it. That's when you go over now. And then like something like that, it might be do you retweet it? If I give you the, let me send you that in the yeah, that'd be great. You know, it's really good. I'm really delighted you asked. Things that are doing and actually everything else. I like the fact that there's something happening today.
Good morning, everyone. And moving on to the second panel, which is the backbone for net zero driving climate activity. What we are focused on is how the infrastructure enables the transition and the change. I have some folk who have advised that, given that I didn't manage the timing on the first panel particularly well, that I need to do better now. And some folk only know me to be sharply on time. So, Karen, with your permission, I'm going to ask a number of the CEOs if they can speak, otherwise we may miss them. For those of you who didn't hear my disclaimer earlier, Karen is actually my boss because I'm a visiting professor at the Centre for Energy Policy at Strathclyde. Okay, so on that basis, then that is the agenda, backbone for net zero. Perhaps I'll invite Corey O'Hara from the National Grid Ventures to begin. Corey, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm president of National Grid Ventures, and in National Grid Ventures, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure we are interconnecting countries so that we can share the potential for vast renewable sources. In particular, we've been building interconnectors between France, the Netherlands, Belgium. We've just successfully completed the longest one in the world in Norway, and I'm sure Hilda will speak to that in detail. We've got another one completing our hiking link in Denmark in 2023. Of course, our UK government has set some very ambitious targets for the power sector, for it to be carbon neutral by 2035, and to have an additional 30 gigawatts of wind by 2030. How we see that evolve from a green grids perspective is this opportunity now to enter another phase for the North Sea. So rather than having wind resources singularly connected to coastal communities, rather than having point-to-point interconnectors, which we're obviously very proud of, is going to this next phase of offshore grid development. And the next phase, as we see it with working with our partners, is this concept of a hybrid or multi-purpose interconnection. That's this tremendous opportunity to enable offshore wind to be accelerated in this next decade, and also to be connected, well, not singularly to one country, but actually through interconnection to at least 2 other countries. That will allow, as more wind enters our systems, resources and surpluses to be shared amongst those borders. It will allow intermittency and resilience to be better coordinated, and of course, we will reduce the impact on coastal communities, and it will ensure a more cost-efficient delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so staying with the grid theme, as we were invited to, Hilda Tonner from Statnet, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to talk to what it takes, what we believe it takes in order to deliver on the net zero targets, to deliver on the Fit for 55 and the lower emissions in 2030. We believe that the grid is at the center of this. But lifting that perspective a little bit, we will need at least 3 things in order to get there. You will need high ambitions, you will need collaboration and integrated solutions, and you will need decisiveness at tempo. And starting with the ambition, and also as my colleague here is pointing at, this is going to take more renewable production. And where else in the world is that better to do than offshore wind in the North Sea? And of course, doing offshore wind, we will need the grid. The ambition is there. The ambition is close to 400 gigawatts in 2050 and more than 100 gigawatts in 2030, given the different countries around the North Sea. The collaboration is also there, but it's really tricky when you want to develop the regulatory framework and integrated solutions across borders and also across sectors. For instance, now we have to see that the power system going into the future will be the new energy system. It will include CCS and hydrogen. It will include solutions where clients coming into the grid will need to be part of the balancing and the market balancing. So the whole collaboration issue is extremely important. And then, of course, decisiveness and tempo. In our line of work, 2030 is today, and 2050 is tomorrow. And we need to start now if this is going to happen. And now I just wanted to also mention a great thing that is actually happening, and that is the North Sea Link, which we are now operating in the market. We are opening it and doing it operationally together with National Grid, and it's so far the world record with 723 kilometers between Norway and UK, the interconnector, and 1,400 megawatts. This is a great thing happening. Without interconnection and collaboration, we will not be able to expand the energy system so that the renewable society can be a reality. So this is crucial also going forward. Thank you so much.
I like the emphasis on cross-border, and I know in Fit for 55, there's lots of stuff to do to get cross-border to work better. Andy Kent from Net Zero Seaside, floor is yours.
Hi, so welcome everybody, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. My name's Andy Lane. I'm the
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Quite right. My
Not Clark Kent either. I didn't fly here in my suit this morning. So Andy Lane, VP for Carbon Capture, Use and Storage and BP, but particularly also the Managing Director for Northern Endurance Partnership. Now, NEP, Northern Endurance Partnership, is a CO2 transport and storage infrastructure project in the northeast of the UK, covering Teesside and Humberside, two industrial regions here in the UK. And a couple of weeks ago, it was selected by the UK government as being one of the two primary carbon capture clusters here in the UK. So I'll just maybe a little bit of background about what that is, because there's a lot of terminology here. So NEP, the pipeline, is the infrastructure that underpins transportation of carbon emissions from a wide range of different industries in Teesside and Humberside. Those industries include existing fertilizer, hydrogen production, chemicals, new build industrial processes as well, including waste to jet fuels. You have an industrial sector. You have a gas-fired power sector where we're planning to build abated carbon generation, low carbon flexible power generation. That's particularly important in the grid as we produce more and more interruptible renewables. We need a balancing capability within the UK grid to keep stability. So CCUS underpins that technology. Hydrogen, there's been a lot of conversation over the last couple of days in meetings I've been in around the hydrogen economy. Well, there are 5 hydrogen projects proposed across Teesside and Humberside, which combined would add over 5 gigawatts of hydrogen into the UK power mix and actually meet the government's objective just in one location. And finally, greenhouse gas reduction technologies, particularly bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, anchored on the large Drax biomass power station, which is in the geography. So the carbon capture infrastructure that we're looking to build and has been selected by government underpins decarbonisation of those 4 different groups of industries, total of 17 emitters in that area. And just to sort of put some of those numbers into context, the emissions from industrial clusters, 50% of those emissions in the UK come from this one area, Teesside and Humberside. And if we get the system to work the way we're planning to, we'll be storing 20 million tonnes of carbon per year by 2030. Now that's a big number. What's that equivalent to? That's about 6 million homes here in the UK. So 6 out of the 28 billion households in the UK are about a quarter. This carbon capture project is equivalent to abating all the emissions from that much of housing stock. So carbon capture makes a really significant impact both on the journey to net zero for the country, also protects a series of industries that might otherwise move forward. So there are significant issues here on just transition, on converting effectively high carbon jobs to low carbon jobs, creating opportunities anchored on what I think of as a green ecosystem, a system where you can build industry and store your carbon and have green power delivered to your doorstep in an industrial area that was the beginning of the industrial age globally, and it will be the beginning of the green industrial age going forward. So happy to take all questions on this. That's a very superficial run across what's going on in the east coast of the UK.
But an important emphasis on the fact that infrastructure is not only about electricity, although that's certainly important, it's also about pipelines and about storage, and that makes it more interesting when you try to integrate all of those pieces together. Right? I'm so interested in the emphasis on hydrogen. So now what I'd like to do is to bring us to Professor Karen Turner from the Centre for Energy Policy. Karen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think, you know, given the time constraints that you've got, Graham, I think rather than running through a presentation as such, I think probably I think really to speak to the last point that you made there about infrastructure. I mean, you know, with some of the challenges that we talked about in the previous sessions, whether, you know, concern was raised over is thinking about job losses, kind of running counter to to trying to achieve climate change. And welcome to my cat who's just made an appearance. I think the key thing here is that infrastructure, you know, what Andy was just talking about there, you know, what's going ahead in the UK, this all needs to be part of the economy going forward. You know, we're talking about a major transition in our economy, and that obviously affects workforces through the just transition. But I think we need to think about these infrastructures as this is what's going to be the new capital stock in our economy, and how we're going to make that work for people. And so I think, you know, one of the challenges that our research found was that while doing things like carbon capture and storage, you are shifting to a new, you're shifting to a new infrastructure, converting jobs from higher carbon to lower carbon. It's all very much about how policymakers and government and businesses work together to integrate this into the economy, and with some of the big challenges being where we're going to have to do early investment, and there's going to be big shifts in operational costs. How are we going to cover this? And this is what brings us to, I think, you know, kind of our core principle in the work we've been doing at Centre for Energy Policy. It's really all about who pays for it in the early stages, because you could start shedding value very early on and affecting communities in a way that make them less willing to go along with whatever the transition plan is. So, you know, I think the key thing was we found challenges around carbon capture and storage, but they're not challenges that should stop it happening. They're challenges that mean we need to think about bringing in carbon capture and storage, changing our energy infrastructure, our energy supply in ways that are going to work for the economy going forward, not only to keep providing people with jobs, but making sure this just becomes part of our productive capacity, and that we pay for it in ways that we don't crowd out people's ability to make a living. We don't raise the cost of living too much. That's not against climate change. It's a challenge for governments and how we all work together in terms of actually, there's been talk this week, the whole global economy is going to have to change, but that's not something that COP's looking at. It's not looking at how the global economy changes. And that's, I think, the big challenge going forward. So Graham, to let you go on, I shall stop at that, just raising those challenges.
Thanks very much, Karen. So it's clear we've had a lot of conversation the first time about the role of jobs, about how they transition and change. But the question of progressive policy to enable this, the matters of burden sharing, etc., will all be important. And classically, of course, infrastructure has been amongst the most difficult things to do in that kind of way. Let me move on to Anna de Youngedal from the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. Did I do a better job with your name than I did with Andy's name?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
That was perfect pronunciation as well. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm from the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. I think we've heard some very interesting discussions here today already, both from the industry perspective, and we've seen some great developments in the UK as well in terms of carbon capture and storage projects and commitments from government level. So I've been asked to talk a bit about CCS from the Norwegian perspective, and of course our big project, the Longship project, which we seem to always talk about when we talk about CCS. You're all aware that both the IPCC and the IEA have stated clearly in their reports that it will be difficult and also more expensive to reach the climate targets without CCS. And so in order for both Norway, Europe, and the global community to achieve the goals that we have committed to in the Paris Agreement, CCS is a necessary mitigation measure as well as other ones. So as more of you have pointed out, there are some challenges in decarbonizing different industry sectors. And some industries in particular, the cement industry and also waste to energy, are one of the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. And CCS is the only way to fully remove all of the emissions from those particular sectors. So Norwegian project Longship, it was launched last year. It can actually help pave the way for CCS as a tool to decarbonize these sectors that can't do it in another way, and thus help facilitate a just transition. So the Longship project is the first full-scale CCS project that integrates a complete chain of individual CO2 providers. There's a flexible transport solution and an open access storage facility. So the project is unique in the fact that it separates the capture operators from the storage. And this allows industry to concentrate on capturing the CO2, while the transport and the storage operator handles the transport and storage part of the CCS operations. So Longship intends to both reduce emissions from Norwegian industry and also create jobs. But the overarching perspective of or aim of the project is the development and deployment of CCS technology internationally. So the project will make a significant contribution both in terms of knowledge sharing and also technological development. And this will hopefully lead to cost reductions in the future, which we all know is one of the biggest parts of investing in CCS at this early stage. So there's no doubt that we need CCS to safeguard industrial jobs and at the same time reach ambitious climate goals. And to achieve this, the industry, the civil service, politicians, academia, and the civil society has to work together. So this is definitely an important climate mitigation measure, and I'm looking forward to see how we can work together, all parts of society, in order to make sure that CCS becomes the climate tool that we need it to be. And I think Annabeth had a very good point in her statement just previously, saying that this is an investment for future income. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the things that strikes me about Longship is that it deals with the question, when you're internationally cooperating and you have to work across borders, that stores are not going to be evenly distributed. And so from a European perspective, that makes it difficult to allocate the money if the beneficiaries are only a small number. But by setting it up the way you have and taking shipped CO2 into the stores, you make for an equitable redistribution of the burn in Europe at large. And the emphasis on the industrial emissions, I think, has also been particularly helpful. We may come back to a number of those points in there, but I have learned the answer to all CCS questions now is Longship. And if you didn't get that, it's Longship. We'll come back to that at the end. All right, so let me just move us on to Gianna Muir from EPT is joining us virtually. But Gianna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Graham. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I'm coming to you from Sofia in Bulgaria, and I'd just like to take you a little bit towards Eastern Europe at the end of this panel to talk about industrial emissions in the region and decarbonization opportunities. So economically speaking, countries in the CEE region are more reliant on industry and on fossil fuel consumption than the rest of the EU. And this is really why they've been quite a focal point of the just transition. They have significantly important manufacturing industries. The Ukraine is one of the world's largest steel producers. We've got significantly important chemical industries in Lithuania and Hungary, and cement production is a major economic driver across the region. And this is really reflected in industrial emissions. So a higher share than the EU average of national emissions in these countries comes from combusting fossil fuels to supply energy to these manufacturing industries. But the standout really is in process emissions from these industries. To give you an example, in 2019, the Ukraine's metallurgy industry emitted 40.6 megatons of CO2, which is more than half of the total EU process emissions for metallurgy in the same year. And compared to the EU average, the share of processed emissions of the chemical industry in Lithuania's national emissions was 9 times higher, and of metallurgy in Slovakia 5 times higher than the EU average. So it goes without saying that we've really got substantial emissions coming from these industries in Central and Eastern Europe, industries which are also key to the economic success of these countries. In terms of decarbonization opportunities for industry, carbon capture is really emerging as a solution for the manufacturing industries. There's a range of decarbonization solutions we can talk about when it comes to the energy that they use. Coal phase out has already been a big topic at the COP so far, but carbon capture is really the primary opportunity to decarbonize process emissions from these industries. Not all of them, some of them are going down alternative routes. We've got hydrogen being planned for steel production in some countries in the region, but the significant importance of the cement and chemical industries, in particular fertilizers, as well as the frankly gargantuan steel production of Ukraine, much of which still uses blast furnaces and open hearth furnaces, means that carbon capture is necessary yesterday in the region. On top of that, the region may also have significant storage potential for CO2. A lot of this still needs additional mapping and research to precisely determine what the storage capacity is. But so far, what we've found is that the eastern region of Donbass in the Ukraine, as well as Poland and Romania, may have significant storage capacities. These range from 15 gigatons on the territory of Poland, right up to about 45 gigatons in the Donbass region. And now all of this is encapsulated in a report that we've recently done, which I was asked to briefly talk about as well. It's part of the CCS4CE project, which is funded by the EEA and Norway grants, and Bellona is an expert partner. And it covers 11 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including the Ukraine, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, with the aim to reignite the discussion around CCS in the region. And the reason I say reignite is really the main finding of the project so far is that even though we obviously have emissions that can be captured and we may have significant storage potential, CCS has not been on the regulatory or policy agenda until now. And possibly for this reason, stakeholders are cautious. They look national and European Union authorities for clear incentives on CCS. Some of these may fall out of the Fit for 55 package, but regardless, national regulation in these countries needs to do more than transposing CCS regulation from the EU to national level, which is what has happened so far. And it needs to focus on removing bottlenecks, administrative, procedural bottlenecks across the long and complex CCS technology chain. So that is number one. The second main finding that I wanted to focus on is that we cannot underestimate the potential of social acceptance to derail CCS in the region. We have an example that's actually CCS related at the Bellona power plant in Poland, but there are numerous other examples of social resistance towards CCS-like projects, for example, gas fracking or gold mining in the Czech Republic, Romania, and Slovakia. CCS knowledge in the region from a public point of view is sparse, and attitudes towards climate change are far less urgent than the rest of the EU. Day-to-day struggles are plentiful and trust in government is very limited. So whatever roadmap for CCS in the region needs to include a significant education component as well as participatory decision-making, and this cannot be ignored. I was also asked to briefly talk about how developments in the North Sea may affect CCS in the Central and Eastern Europe region. So obviously we've talked a little bit about Longship. And one of the potential ways it can affect CCS developments is actually a very practical one. Carbon storage in the Baltic states is currently prohibited. So any carbon capture projects would need to plug in to transport and storage projects happening in the North Sea, such as Longship. But more broadly, the advanced work that's going on around CCS around the North Sea can generate the knowledge and skills that can and should be transferred to Central and Eastern Europe, applying carbon capture to cement production at scale, implementing CCS hubs or industrial clusters, which show real potential in the CEE region, given the traditional proximity of industrial emitters to fossil fuel extraction sites, many of which are depleted and cannot be used for carbon storage. So overall, demonstrating full chain CCUS at scale in the North Sea can really help build investor confidence and practical knowledge that we need to make CCS a reality in Central and Eastern Europe. A report will shortly come out. I'm sure the Bellona Foundation will also share it. It's due to come out after the COP, so as not to distract from the important work going on. But I think that's it from me. So thank you very much, and back to you, Graham.
Thank you. So since a need for cooperation across the piece, the capacity for learning and the delivery of better outcomes as a result of that. Perhaps particularly the cluster point being of significant relevance in Eastern Europe. So we have, I think, a little time left if there are some questions for the panel from the audience. So I think first, if you would use the microphone, it will help with.
Thank you. I'm Anna from Aldersgate Group. I just wanted to ask the panel, it's really great to hear about all these projects on CCS and hydrogen, especially TSAT. It's obviously a bit of industrial activity. But what does the panel think are the next steps for rolling out some of that, some of those infrastructure projects and the technology to other industrial locations across the UK, but also in Europe and across the world?
Would like to answer?
I
think. Go ahead.
This is very loud, sorry. I can start in the sense of, you know, the UK is making tremendous progress with carbon capture and storage, and Andy is the lead partner, and I'm delighted to be part of the NEP here in the UK. The next steps are really building the business models and the regulatory frameworks that really support the first of a kind of technology like CCUS in the UK, and that's about the right arrangements for the onshore and offshore storage and transportation system, but then also the right arrangements that allow the emitter projects in the region to invest in their capture technology and then can sequence and get fair equal access to the network itself. So there's a tremendous focus over the next 6 months on agreeing the regulatory frameworks, setting the tempo with government, and making sure this is a practical reality for the region. And the final point I'd make is, you know, these first of kind technologies, there's a lot of work to do with the local communities. They need to see the benefit of this. We all know it's the right thing to do in terms of these are hard to abate sectors, but they need to benefit from clean air, green skilled jobs, and the potential for to create hubs for clean industrial products in the future. I think once we've got through the business model phase, you can look at how replicable that is in other regions. Do you want to add anything?
Just maybe to build on that, I think Corey's absolutely right about the near term, the need for concluding what the government would call business models, the kind of policy structure that follows with that. But I think the rollout is really important here. The government has run a competition recently in which East Coast cluster was selected, but there were 5 clusters working on, and then there's a following 3 or 4 which would move their CO2 by ship rather than by pipeline, and they're sort of naturally take a second place in terms of sequencing. Realistically, we need all of them. It's not about just doing 2 and then going, you know, we have to establish those first 2, use those as the pioneers to make sure that regulations work, experiment a little bit with some of the technology elements, and then roll it out rapidly in the UK, and then frankly rapidly elsewhere as well, because the model being developed in the UK around industrial hubs works just as well in Eastern Europe, just as well in the Texas Gulf Coast, just as well in multiple other locations around the world. There's no reason why that can't be lifted and shifted. So the conversations we have with government about outreach to other governments on policy and sharing policy understandings in the same way that industry is quite used to sharing industry understandings, but I think all parts of that work together. And the real skill here is get going on 1 or 2 to start off with and then roll it out really quickly elsewhere and learn all of those lessons. I think the dynamic in the industry is very collaborative at this stage. You know, this is a very early and young industry, and there's a high degree of collaboration between all the partners. That's healthy because that knowledge then disseminates quite widely, quite quickly across industry, government, and the various other stakeholders, and allows you to replicate more quickly elsewhere. So I'm a massive optimist that what we do here, we make a snowball start to roll, and it will roll quickly once we get them moving. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out the need for seeing the power system now being the new energy system. I think it's extremely important that we, there are some challenges here that we need to you know, start working on already now. The whole system operation challenge and the balancing challenge in a power system, given that there will be a change of energy mix in the totality of the energy system, that is something that takes integration across borders, it takes interconnection, and it takes integration across sectors and across nations. And to develop that, I think the North Sea and that the area around the North Sea is really a very well starting point that can show the world that this is the route towards the net zero society. It's not going to happen overnight. So although we have great industrial initiatives around the North Sea, we have to remember it's going to take more production. It's going to take more system operation and balancing of those markets. And obviously that through the grids. And lots of investments.
Lots of investments. It almost sounds like we need a plan. Okay. Go ahead. Please. Bring you the mic.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for the panel. I'm Jeff Swartz with BP, and actually that was my question, was to build off of your comments, Hilda. You spoke about the importance of the Sea-Link connector and delivering net zero. And for me, the question is more around what kind of policy frameworks do you think need to be in place so that there is more grid interconnections between Norway or other countries? Because it seems like you talked about interconnections being in the Fit for 55 package, but I don't see that grand vision coming from Europe, at least in the total proposal. So I wonder if you could comment a little bit more about that. Maybe Porter, you have comments as well.
I can start by linking that to the just and the acceptance question, because I think there's a need for understanding among people that, of course, this is going to take a lot of investments, but it's also going to take integrated solutions that enables us to expand the energy system so that you have enough flexibility with new energy mix. So when you get weather-based energies into the system, when you get hydrogen as a storage into the system, when you get different elements that we talk about a lot, you will have to have a wider perspective of what an energy system is. And one solution on that is obviously interconnection between nations so that you can, exchange. The policy needed for that is something that is already happening, for instance, in the Nordics. We're fairly good at working integrated across borders in the Nordics, and we've done for 30 to 50 years. It's happening more and more across borders in Europe as such. And the whole policy development there is something that needs to happen. I wouldn't say it's going with the right tempo. Absolutely not. But it's being focused. And there's also a challenge in doing it too complex and doing it too centralized. We might have to think regions prior to doing centralization. So there are several issues here, but my point is only to say integration is key, regulatory-wise, investment-wise, partnership-wise, in order to make this happen.
And a number of the regulatory instruments that can make this happen are really dull. And the trouble is that often the dull stuff is really, really important. And so I'm currently almost obsessed with the Trans-European Network regulations, because they're going to make a huge difference to how all of this works. Okay. So are there any other questions? I know you guys are tight for time. So in fact, what I wanted to do is to thank you all for your presence here on the panel today. And just to say overall, planning has been a theme of the two pieces. The matter of whether or not change compromises welfare, and the emerging view, I think, echoed by all of you, that that's not true. Actually, it creates a new kind of welfare, and it creates maybe welfare that endures over time, and it's no reason to not commence the activity. The backbone infrastructure and a lot of investment is required, but the capacity is sitting in front of us to deliver on that. So thank you very much.
You're right.